Chapter 112. Mammy Lee was so scared that she couldn't speak. If it was said that she was afraid of Shun Yueji with disdain, but she was really afraid of Mo Wushang. That kind of fear came from the inside, even her hair, every part of her was full of fear for him. She was motionless, as if she was nailed to the same place. Her whole body was cold, as if cold water had been poured over her. Even so, Mammy Lee still clenched her teeth, and her voice trembled. She still pretended to be calm. She smiled coldly and looked at Shun Yueji. Imperial concubine, you are really shameless. Everyone in the capital knows that the regent hates you. It is you who has been pestering the regent. How could a person of the prince-regent status be with someone like you? Swoosh. A cold light flashed in front of her eyes. Shun Yueji didn't have time to see it clearly. Mammy Lee only felt that the cold light was coming to her. It was so fast that she thought she was dazzled. When she felt a bone-piercing pain in her left arm, she let out a blood-curdling scream. He clutched his left arm that had fallen to the ground. His empty left arm was filled with fresh blood that was gushing out of it. Her face was as white as a sheet of paper. She covered her broken arm and shivered in the night. The soil under her body was dyed red by her blood. She looked at Mo Wushang in horror. He was so handsome and noble that no one dared to look at him. Regent. Regent. I dare to ask what I did wrong. Her lips trembled, and the corners of her lips were bleeding because of the pain. Mo Wushang's cold eyes swept over her face. He grabbed Shun Yueji into his arms and held her tightly. Lung Xiao's voice was filled with love. How do you want her to die? Mammy Lee is the most trusted maid of the Empress. The Empress doesn't know about Yu Xiu. Now Mammy Lee is involved. I'm afraid that the Empress will suspect me. What can I do? She pretended to be in a dilemma, which made the man look very cute. He raised his eyebrows. Put it on me. Shun Yueji grinned and said, then send Mammy Lee to the two-headed monster. Let them drink the blood of those young and beautiful palace maids. Let them taste the blood of this old thing and see how it tastes. Yu Xiu. Yu Xiu. Mammy Lee struggled to get up from the ground and murmured, what did you do to Yu Xiu? Imperial concubine Shun, how dare you? You'll know soon enough. You won't have a good ending for going against the Gu family. Shun Yueji, if you dare to touch me and the Empress finds out, she definitely won't let you off lightly. Shun Yueji patted off the dust on her hands and glanced at her lightly. Her voice was full of sarcasm. Are your ears not working well now that you're old? I did not interfere in this matter. The person who touched you was the Prince Regent. If your Gu family is really capable and doesn't fear the Prince Regent, you can come and find the Prince Regent to punish you. However, she deliberately kept them in suspense. It depends on whether your Gu family is willing to offend the Regent because of an insignificant maid. Ji Chu. Yes, Master. Ji Chu stepped forward and picked Mammy Lee up from the ground as if she was a dead person. Chapter 113. The two eunuchs' corpses and the bloodstains on the ground were also cleaned up by the men in black in the blink of an eye. The night returned to its previous tranquility. The strong smell of blood dissipated, and the cold moonlight shone on people's bodies, which seemed particularly warm. Shun Yueji frowned as she looked at the soil that had been refurbished on the ground. She frowned again and again. Suddenly, she raised her head. She met Mo Wushang's puzzled eyes. Oh no, the food is going to be burnt. She quickly pushed the man away and ran to the imperial kitchen. Before entering, a pungent smell came from inside, causing her to cover her nose. A cloud of green smoke came out from inside. Fortunately, it was only the food that was burnt, and it had not reached the point of a fire in the imperial kitchen. She wiped away the cold sweat on her forehead. If this meal really burned down the imperial kitchen, it would really be her fault. Mo Wushang followed behind her, and his unkind eyes looked at the green smoke from inside. In the green smoke, the little woman ran to the stove, and a smell of burnt spread from the pot. His handsome face was gloomy and gloomy. Shun Yueji lifted the lid of the pot. The porridge was burnt and stuck to the pot, mixed with the black pot ash and burnt smell. No matter how she looked at it, she had no appetite. When she looked up, she saw the man's unhappy face. Shin Yueji withdrew her hand bitterly. Well, I forgot the time when I was outside, and forgot that there was still something cooking in the pot. But you, too, who allowed you to go out? Stay here and guard the fire, so that it won't be burnt. Seeing that she attributed the problem to him in a few words, Mo Wushang's handsome face moved slightly, and his expression seemed a little wronged. He walked to her without saying a word, looked down at the mess in the pot. Shin Yueji felt distressed when she saw this. After all, he had helped her just now, and he was so cooperative. She patted the man's shoulder comfortingly. It's okay, just make do with it. She found a bowl and scooped out the top layer of porridge with a spoon. She handed it to him. Mo Wushang's dark eyes looked at the bowl, which was also black, and he could not see the ingredients of the porridge. Apart from the steam, it could be said that there was nothing to see at all. Shin Yueji filled 2 bowls of porridge and brought out the 2 plates of side dishes. Fortunately, the dishes were not burnt. Thus, just like that, the 2 of them carried the burnt porridge and 2 plates of side dishes up to the roof of the imperial kitchen. Under the moonlight, they began to eat. The burnt porridge was indeed not tasty, and the side dishes that were stained with the burnt smell were also very weird. Shin Yueji ate a few mouthfuls and couldn't eat any more. She turned to look at the man, only to find that his movements were elegant. Even when he was eating, he didn't frown. His expression seemed to be more appetizing than when he was eating. Dumbfounded, she picked up a piece of black food with her chopsticks and put it into the man's bowl. However, the man's obsidian eyes flashed with light. He put the dish she picked up into his mouth and chewed slowly with a happy expression. Shin Yueji, somewhat flattered, she looked at the man. This food, is it really so delicious? Doesn't the Prince Regent feel that something is wrong? The man's thin lips moved, his brows raised as he looked at her with his dark eyes. Delicious. And then, Shin Yueji simply put down the bowl and chopsticks, watching the man eat the burnt food clean. Chapter 114. Closing her surprised jaw, Shin Yueji patted the man's shoulder with a distressed look. These days, I've really wronged you. Now you don't even have a sense of taste. Don't worry, the next time you come, I will cook a few delicious dishes for you. Looking at the red and swollen little hand on his shoulder, Mo Wushang moved his lips. He wrapped her little hand in his palm. Maybe it was because she had been sitting outside for too long, her little hand was a little cold. He took off his black robe, intending to put it on her. Unexpectedly, Shin Yueji immediately waved her hand and refused. Don't, Prince Regent. Your clothes are too cold. I will freeze to death if you put it on me. The man's dark eyes were as deep as the night. He no longer cared about the clothes on his body, but turned to hold her in his arms. He thought that Shin Yueji would shiver because of the cold breath on his body. Unexpectedly, the man's body was exceptionally warm. Mo Wushang held her carefully in his arms and rubbed her restless little head with his smooth chin. My body is not cold. The dense night gradually dissipated, and there was slowly some light in the dark night. It was almost dawn. Shin Yueji nestled in the man's arms, staring at the rising sun. Mo Wushang, tell me honestly, do you like to compete with the emperor for women? The man's hand on her waist tightened again and again. His Adam's apple moved and his face darkened. I don't like to compete with him. I only like you. Then first, when the words were on the tip of her mouth, Shin Yueji simply shut her mouth and stopped talking. She stayed in the man's arms for a while. After Mammy Li dies, let Ji Chu throw her body to Xianghe Palace. Yes. Little Zhuozi is not easy to see now. I am not familiar with this palace and don't know who can be trusted. I dare not hide little Zhuozi rashly. Let Ji Chu find a place where no one is around to settle down first. After a few days, I will ask the emperor for him. After all, he has helped me. If I let him return to Xianghe Palace, it is undoubtedly pushing him into the fire pit. Okay. The man unconditionally obeyed her words. Shin Yueji immediately beamed with joy. For the first time in her life, she realized that the feeling of a man doting on her, caring for her, and protecting her was so good. Compared to Feng Jiuqing, this was the first time in so many years that she had experienced such a feeling from a man. For some inexplicable reason, she felt like she had someone to rely on. It's getting late, I should go back. Oh, right. Do you still plan to let Ji Chu and the others drain South Lake's water? Mo Wushang's good-looking eyes fell on her body. He stared at her delicate little face for a while and said, Ji Yu will listen to you. Looking at the beautiful face in front of her, Shen Yueji's eyes were filled with excitement. Really? The man's dark eyes softened as he nodded. Shen Yueji's long eyelashes fluttered a few times. Compared to draining the water of South Lake, I think it's better for the regent to boil some water in South Lake. I think it's, taking a deep breath, Shen Yueji glared at him fiercely and covered her waist. What are you doing? Damn. Why did you pinch me? Mo Wushang's handsome face, which was originally filled with tenderness, instantly darkened. He glanced coldly at Shen Yueji. Chapter 115. Later, Mo Wushang sent her back to Fengqi Palace. On the way back, he didn't even look at her, let alone talk to her. Shen Yueji didn't know what she had done wrong. Mo Wushang, who was silent and cold, looked really scary. She tried to talk to him. Well, actually, I did this for the sake of the late Empress. You know, after the late Empress died, she was so lonely down there. I just wanted to find a few more handsome men to talk to her. Actually, you don't have to stare at me with such a fierce look. Well, under the man's dangerous gaze, Shen Yueji obediently shut up. Your Highness, how did you offend the regent? When I saw him leave, his eyes were full of fire, and he looked scarier than usual. After Mo Wushang left, Double Happiness came in, trembling with fear. Shen Yueji took a sip of tea to soothe her throat. Nothing much, just talking about the late Empress. Oh. Double Happiness's face showed a look of understanding, as if she understood. By the way, as if thinking of something, Shen Yueji put down the teacup in her hand. Didn't you say that Big Brother could send Li Yaro's 3 daughters to the palace yesterday? It's been a day, why haven't they arrived yet? Your Highness, don't mention it. That Li Yingying is really a concubine's daughter, timid and inexperienced. On the way back to the capital, she fainted 3 times. Young master has been busy looking for a doctor for her, and was delayed for 2 days on the way. Really? Shen Yueji slightly moved her eyebrows, turning the teacup on the table. In my impression, Li Yingying shouldn't be such a coward, right? She could survive being bullied by a group of sisters until now, so she shouldn't be so cowardly. These days, have you found any quick-witted eunuchs and maids in our palace? Double Happiness seriously thought for a moment. These maids and eunuchs are usually busy cleaning Fengqi Palace, trembling with fear. I really haven't seen any little eunuchs or maids who are smart enough. Speaking of this, Double Happiness's eyes lit up. Oh, yes, there is one. Shen Yueji looked at her. Call him here. Shock appeared in Shuangxi's eyes. Your Highness wants to see him? Seeing her like this, Shen Yueji raised her eyebrows. What's wrong? That little eunuch's face is ugly and half of his face is scarred. There's a big red mark on his face and it looks quite scary. This servant is afraid that her ladyship will be scared if she sees him. However, he is quite quick-witted. The last time this servant almost fell, he was the one who caught the plate in my hand. Oh! Shen Yueji's hand that was twirling the teacup paused. Call him over and let me have a look. Yes, Your Highness. Not long after, Double Happiness led a skinny little eunuch into the room. The little eunuch's head was lowered and his face could not be seen clearly. His thin and weak body, in Shen Yueji's eyes, was thinner than any of the little eunuchs in the palace. Even Xiao Zhuoz's thin and weak body could not compare to him. Servant Huaiyang greets the imperial consort. Huaiyang. The little eunuch's name piqued Shen Yueji's interest. Her lips curled into a faint smile. It's rare for those lowly servants in the palace to have this kind of name. Most of them had names like Xiao Zhuozi or Xiao Lizzy. Double Happiness laughed at the side. That's why this servant feels that is quite special, Your Highness. Chapter 116. Her gaze fell on him for a moment. Raise your head and let Ben Gong see. Huaiyang obediently raised his head. Just as Shuangxi had described, half of his face was ugly. Red marks covered half of his cheeks, ugly and frightening. but the other face was white and smooth, like fine silk. He was born with a pair of extremely beautiful eyes, bright and resplendent, clear and clean. For a moment, Shin Yueji was stunned. Apart from the ugly half of his face, a man like this was undoubtedly outstanding. How did he enter the palace to become a eunuch? When did you enter the palace? Your Highness, this servant has been in the palace for less than a year. Less than a year and you were sent to Phoenix Perch Palace. Is there any powerful eunuch in the palace that you rely on? Huayang probably didn't expect her to speak so bluntly. He paused and replied respectfully, previously, Xionghe Palace's eunuch Tang. When he mentioned eunuch Tang, his pair of clear and clean eyes suddenly became incomparably cold. A cold aura emanated from his body. Xionghe Palace's eunuch Tang had helped this servant a lot. Xionghe Palace? You used to be a servant of Xionghe Palace? Hearing Xionghe Palace, Shuangxi's expression turned ugly. If she had known that he used to be a servant of Xionghe Palace, she wouldn't have mentioned him in front of the Empress. Your Highness, Huayang is a servant of Xionghe Palace. You can't put him in an important position. Walking in front of Shin Yueji, Shuangxi lowered her head and whispered in her ear. Huayang's kneeling body was as straight as a pine tree, neither servile nor overbearing. Even his gaze towards her was full of stubbornness. She didn't see the fear and trepidation that a servant would have when he saw his master. Shin Yueji slightly straightened her body, her hand on the armrest of the chaise longue, tapping it lightly. I've heard of Tang Cai. I heard that he has quite a bit of power in Xionghe Palace. Since you've received his help before, you should also be a servant of Xionghe Palace. The Empress doted on the 6 palaces. Any servant of Xionghe Palace would have a limitless future. To put it bluntly, being able to be a servant of Auspicious Harmony Palace was a treatment that was comparable to being an unfavored concubine in the harem. Huayang's hands, which were hanging by his sides, suddenly clenched very tightly, and many green veins appeared on the back of his hands. The man's dark eyes were no longer as clear and clean as before. Instead, they were filled with impurities, pitch black and turbid. Shin Yueji looked interested. What did Tang Cai do to you? This Empress doesn't care who you used to work for. This Empress only knows that since you're serving in this Empress Phoenix Perch Palace, then you're my Phoenix Perch Palace's servant. This Empress needs to know everything that happened to you in the palace this past year. Otherwise, this Empress will not be able to put someone in an important position, someone whose background I don't even know. The word important struck Huayang's heart heavily. He suddenly raised his head. His eyes were filled with a dense light as he stared straight at Shin Yueji. How dare you? The Imperial Consort is not someone you can look at directly. Double Happiness scolded in a low voice. Huayang reacted. He quickly lowered his gaze and knelt on the ground. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Your servant, tell me, what did Tang Cai do to you, and how did you get arranged to serve in this Phoenix Perch Palace? The man's eyes narrowed, and a dark shadow flashed past the depths of his eyes. The back of his hands were tightly clenched. Chapter 117. Sure enough. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, Huayang opened his mouth in a hoarse voice. Eunuch Tang is good with words. He can make the eunuchs and nannies who are above him in the palace happy every time. Even Yu Xiu and Mami Li, who serve the Empress, value Eunuch Tang. In Xionghe Palace, except for the Empress and some of her maids, Eunuch Tang is half a master. All the servants in Xionghe Palace don't dare to offend him, and he, speaking of something shameful, Huayang gritted his teeth and said, Eunuch Tang has coveted almost all the pretty maids and eunuchs in Xionghe Palace. Most of them have been. His voice gradually trembled, and he couldn't even speak clearly. But Double Happiness and Shin Yueji understood what he was trying to say. Shin Yueji raised her eyebrows. She didn't expect that there would be an unexpected gain. When I first entered the palace, I was chosen by Eunuch Tang because I was prettier than the other eunuchs. I followed Eunuch Tang and tried my best. Later, I found out that Eunuch Tang didn't really want to help me. He just liked my face. After the death of the former emperor, the new emperor ascended the throne. The emperor was kind, So most of the maids and eunuchs in the harem stayed and continued to work in the palace. This eunuch Tang has been in the palace for decades, and his status in the harem is not something that anyone can afford to offend. Later, after the new emperor ascended the throne, he was arranged to work in Xianghe Palace. This is enough to show how much importance the emperor places on him. Shen Yueji stroked her temples. Go on. After that, eunuch Tang said that he had something for me to do, so he asked me to wait for him at his place. In the end, when I went there, eunuch Tang lit his room with incense that could make people fall in love. I realized that something was wrong and wanted to escape. Hua Yang's voice became more and more trembling. I struggled desperately and finally pushed eunuch Tang away and ran out. But because of that, I hurt eunuch Tang. So, this face of yours was made by him? Yes. Hua Yang gritted his teeth. At that time, there were a few eunuchs who were on good terms with this servant. All of them were violated by him. Some of them refused to obey and were stripped naked by him. Then, they were nailed to their beds. Some time had passed since then, but every time Hua Yang thought about it, the scene in front of him would still appear in his mind, and he wouldn't be able to sleep well. He would tie those who disobeyed him to the bed and torture them to death. He would make them kneel by the side and watch, not even allowed to blink. Because I rejected him, he used a branding iron to burn my face. Half of my skin was peeled off by him. Hua Yang's voice trembled violently. That kind of despair, helplessness, and heart-wrenching pain were things that he could clearly feel even now. A life worse than death. Eunuch Tang has a secret room in his residence. It's filled with his torture tools and piles of bones. There are also many half-dead people tied up there. He would enter the secret room every night to humiliate them. Chapter 118. They had thought of telling the emperor that the emperor would come to the empress's Xianghe Palace every night, but even the empress wanted to help Tang Cai hide it. Every time a eunuch brought it up, the empress would find a topic to avoid it. The emperor had always doted on the empress the most. No matter what the empress said, he never questioned it. Slowly, they understood that their efforts were futile and that they could only be trampled on. Hua Yang didn't know why he was so talkative today. In front of the imperial concubine, he actually said all the words that he had suppressed in his heart for so long without changing a word. It was as if the knot in his heart had been opened up and he had someone to talk to. Later, when I hurt my face, eunuch Tang lost his patience with me. When the imperial concubine entered the palace, he saw that I was an eyesore, so he arranged for me to come to Fengqi Palace. Shen Yueji couldn't help but chuckle when she heard this. This eunuch Tang is so arrogant. He casually tossed a servant that he didn't want from Auspicious Harmony Palace to my Phoenix Perch Palace. So it turns out that in his eyes, I'm so insignificant. Double Happiness's face was filled with righteous indignation. This Tang Cai is so daring. He actually dared to do such a thing in the palace. Your Highness, should we tell this to the Emperor? Shen Yueji raised her hand. Seeing this, Double Happiness immediately shut up. Hua Yang's eyes had been shining, but when he saw Shen Yueji's gesture, his eyes dimmed. That's right. The person who was favored by the 6 palaces was the Empress. Even the Empress intentionally concealed the truth for Tang Cai. In the inner palace, who dared to seek their own death and find trouble with Tang Cai? Everyone was probably clenching their teeth, afraid that this matter would be related to them and they would lose their lives. You sound so moved, but how can this Empress believe your one-sided words? Hua Yang knelt on the ground and kowtowed heavily. What I said is true. If there is any falsehood in my words, may I be struck by lightning. Shen Yueji smiled faintly and looked at him. Moreover, I can't interfere with the matters of your Xianghe Palace. I can't offend the Empress for a little eunuch like you. What do you think? Hua Yang's face was as white as paper. Despite the disappointment in his heart, he still nodded. Guifei is right. However, I am not such a cold-hearted person. Hua Yang's gloomy eyes gradually lit up with hope. Originally, I had asked Double Happiness to call you over because I had something else to tell you to do, but I didn't expect you to have such an unbearable experience. Hua Yang, this consort doesn't know much about you. As for your words or your loyalty, this consort can't be certain. If Imperial Consort can help this servant redress the injustice today and take revenge for those who died, this servant is willing to serve Imperial Consort faithfully and will not dare to have any other thought. Helping you is just to let you meet His Majesty and tell him the whole story. When the time comes, His Majesty will personally make the decision. However, the Emperor had always been protective of the Empress. Last time, Ben Gong and the Empress had even had a bad misunderstanding. In the end, the Emperor had sided with the Empress and felt that the Empress was the victim. If Ben Gong helped you, it would be clearly making trouble for the Empress in front of His Majesty. At that time, not only would the Empress hate Ben Gong, even His Majesty would not like to see Ben Gong. This servant will listen to Imperial Consort. Whatever Imperial Consort wants this servant to do, this servant will do. Chapter 119. Walking up to him, Shen Yueji whispered a few words in his ear. Huai Yang's expression changed again and finally calmed down. Yes. Your Highness, can this servant from Auspicious Harmony Palace be trusted? His Jiyu Yuan's man, what if he's a spy Jiyu Yuan arranged in our Phoenix Perch Palace? I didn't say much to him, I just said that there's someone familiar in Jiaoyang Palace and told him to inform Jiyu Yuan. Even if Jiyu Yuan knows that I ordered Huai Yang to inform her, she can't say anything. Even so, Double Happiness still looked hesitant. That's too risky. I'm afraid that Huai Yang really is the Empress man, and when he finds out that Your Highness is behind this, he'll turn around and harm you. Do you think he's done anything that's not beneficial to me? Shen Yueji pursed her lips and smiled. Besides, what's there to be afraid of? Don't we still have the regent? Hearing this, Shuangshi's worry turned into joy. Yes, your ladyship is currently protected by the regent, and with our Shen family, even if the Empress wanted to harm your ladyship, she would have to weigh her own weight. Just one Shen family is not something that she could easily touch, not to mention that behind your ladyship, there is still the regent supporting her. Auspicious Harmony Palace, what did you say? With this shout, the tea set on the table was smashed down by a pair of delicate hands. In a split second, the sound of crackling echoed throughout the hall. Your Highness, calm down, Your Highness, calm down. The servants of Auspicious Harmony Palace knelt on the ground. All of them were trembling with fear. Yes, this servant saw it with my own eyes. When this servant passed by Jiaoyang Palace, I saw Miss Yu Xiu. Miss Yu Xiu, Yu Xiu had disappeared last night and had yet to return. Jiyu Yuan was suspicious and ordered people to look for her in secret, but there was no news. The first person she suspected was Shen Yueji. When she ordered her spies to investigate Jiaoyang Palace, she received news that the Emperor was staying at Jiaoyang Palace. She secretly clenched her fists. Since the Emperor was with her, Shen Yueji didn't need to do anything to get rid of Yu Xiu. However, she was shocked in her heart when she heard the 3 words Mink Sun Palace, and she had a bad premonition. She suppressed the uneasiness in her heart. Her pair of gentle eyes were now ferocious and sinister. Coupled with her ugly face under the veil, it was even more terrifying. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and head to Jiaoyang Palace. Bring Yu Xiu back. Yes. Yes. After she finished speaking, she shot a cold glare at Huai Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. If you dare to lie, this Empress will definitely remove your head. This servant's words are absolutely true. This servant saw it with his own eyes. I definitely wouldn't dare to lie. In less than an hour, Yu Xiu's body was carried back by 2 eunuchs wrapped in white silk. Jiyu Yuan sat on the phoenix throne. After they left, she couldn't calm down. Yu Xiu suddenly disappeared, and even Mammy Li's whereabouts were unknown. She had sent her out last night to get rid of Xiao Zhuozi, but she had yet to return. Now that the white silk was pulled apart, Yu Xiu's face was purple and bloodless. Her entire body was like a piece of white paper, and no flesh could be seen. She stared in shock and fear. Her mouth was wide open, and there was no tongue in it. There were 2 sharp marks on her purple neck, as if she had been strangled to death with sharp nails. Chapter 120. The next moment, Your Highness, bad news, Your Highness, Mammy Li. A sharp voice mixed with terror came from outside the hall. Jiyu Yuyin looked over and saw a panic-stricken young eunuch tumbling and crawling on the ground, his face as white as a sheet of paper from fright. Your Highness. Your Highness, Mammy Li. Mammy Li. Jiyu Yuyin clenched her teeth and tried to calm her trembling heart. She pretended to be calm and said, "What happened to Mammy Li?" Mammy Li. Mammy Li is dead. What? Jiyu Yuyin widened her eyes and her face was full of disbelief. Two eunuchs carried Mammy Li's body in from outside. There were two sharp strangulation marks on Yu Xiu's neck, and there was a deep wound on Mammy Li's neck. Blood diffused from the wound and solidified on her neck. Her torso inside seemed to be completely hollowed out, and it was all supported by her bones and unknown things. But what scared Jiyu Yuyin the most was her face, which was studded with nails. There were 9 thick nails. Every part of her face, every corner, looked exactly like Jiyu Yuqin at that time. Her scalp was numb. She staggered to sit on the phoenix chair and almost fell down. Fortunately, the maid beside her held her in time. She looked at the maid with trembling and tearful eyes. Her vision blurred, and all of a sudden, a face that she couldn't be more familiar with appeared in front of her eyes. It was a terrifying face that was full of rough nails. "Ah!" she screamed and pushed the maidservant away. "Get lost. Get out of here. Get out of here. Your Highness, what's wrong with you?" The maid who was pushed away looked scared and puzzled. "She's back. She must be back," Jiyu Yuyin murmured in a daze. Her almond-shaped eyes were full of tears. "I want to see the Emperor. I want to see the Emperor. Your Highness, the Emperor is discussing with the ministers in the imperial kitchen. I don't care. I don't care. I want to see the Emperor. Go quickly. Go to the imperial study room. Go now." After Jiyu Yuyin finished speaking emotionally, she felt her vision darken and her powerless body fell straight to the ground. "Your Highness, what's wrong with you? Your Highness, wake up." For a moment, the servants of Auspicious Harmony Palace were in chaos. Many panicked shouts could be heard. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and inform His Majesty in the imperial study. Quickly summon the imperial physician. Summon the imperial physician. If anything happens to Her Majesty, be careful of your heads." Huai Yang looked at the scene in front of him coldly. The servants of Xianghe Palace were in a flurry. Without the support of Yu Xiu and Mammy Li, they didn't know what to do. While no one was paying attention, he quietly retreated. After returning to Phoenix Perch Palace, he told Shen Yueji everything he had seen in Auspicious Harmony Palace, including how Jiyu Yuyin had fainted from fright. Double Happiness listened with great interest. In the end, she didn't forget to pour a cup of tea for Shen Yueji. She even poured a cup of tea for Huai Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. Taking a sip of tea, Shen Yueji looked doubtful. "I didn't expect the death of Yu Xiu and Mammy Li to have such a big impact on Sister Empress." Chapter 121. Shen Yueji gently knocked on the table and glanced at him. Seeing this, Huai Yang immediately shut his mouth. "Since you are now my servant in Fengqi Palace, you should remember what you should say and what you shouldn't say. The late Empress has been dead for several months, and the Emperor is a wise monarch. How can he believe these so-called ghosts and gods? If you continue spouting nonsense, even I won't be able to protect you if someone with ulterior motives hears you." "Yes, I will obey your Highness's words." "All right. Shuang Shi." "Yes, Your Highness." "Prepare a few things. Later, accompany me to Xionghe Palace to visit Her Majesty the Empress." "Yes, Your Highness." Shuang Shi responded respectfully and went to prepare. Shen Yueji glanced at Huai Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. "The rest is up to you. Consider it my reward for you. As for whether the Emperor will believe your words and punish you because of a moment of anger, it's all up to you." "Thank you, Your Highness. I understand." When Shen Yueji arrived at Xianghe Palace, she found that the outside of Xianghe Palace was surrounded by colorful concubines. She had never had a good look at Feng Jiuqing's harem, whether it was when she was alive or now. She only knew that any beauty in the harem was a beauty that could topple a city or country. Every move of the beauty was breathtakingly beautiful. When the concubines saw her coming, there were disdain and flattery on their faces. No matter if they were disdain or flattery, when they saw her approaching, they all saluted. Greetings, Sister Imperial Concubine. Greetings, Sister Imperial Concubine. Shun Yueji stopped in front of them, and her bright eyes quickly swept over them. All my sisters are here. We really have a deep sisterhood. As soon as I heard that Sister Imperial Concubine was sick, we all came to see her. But why are you all standing outside? Sister Imperial Concubine, you don't know. It's the Emperor who doesn't allow us to go in. Oh. I heard that Her Highness fainted because of the late Emperor. And before I came here, I also heard that Mammy Li, the trusted maid of the Empress, had her face covered with 9 thick nails before she died. Rumor has it that when the late Empress died, her face had the same 9 nails. Shun Yueji glanced at the concubine who spoke. She wore a long green dress, and her face was slightly powdered. She was beautiful and refined, her small face exquisite, and her figure exquisite. His lips curled up slightly. Which younger sister are you? The former empress only said that she was drowned in the lake, but Ben Gong did not know when her face was covered with thick nails. You can't just say things like that. It's true. There are very few people who know this. I am one of them, but I was not sure until Mammy Li died and the empress fainted in shock. Then I was sure. When the concubines heard this, they all sighed and fell silent. Shun Yueji's small face was cold, and no one could tell whether she was happy or angry. However, the concubine didn't know how to read people's expressions. She continued to say, I have long heard that the late empress was not favored when she was in the Jiyu family. She was bullied every day, and the Jiyu family raised her like a dog. And the empress never treated the late empress as her own sister. Now, the empress was so scared just because of Mammy Li. It was clear that she had a guilty conscience. Maybe the late empress's death was. Shun Yueji scolded in a low voice. Chapter 122. Shun Yueji smiled coldly. Who are you? Why is Ben Gong addressing you as sister? Ben Gong can't afford to be called elder sister. Turning the jade bracelet on her wrist, Shun Yueji restrained the bone-piercing coldness in her eyebrows. Her voice was not angry but dignified. Empress Jejie treats the younger sisters well, right? Now that she hasn't lost her power, you're stepping on her with a proud face. If your words are heard by the emperor today, it's a small matter if your heads are taken off. If your families are implicated because of this, Ben Gong wants to see who you can cry to. The woman in green kneeling on the ground was already scared out of her wits. Her face was pale as she knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing to Shun Yueji. Imperial consort, please forgive me. Imperial consort, please forgive me. It's all this concubine's confusion. It's all this concubine's fault for speaking nonsense. I beg Imperial consort not to tell the emperor. This concubine really knows her mistake. Not only her, but all the concubines present also looked at Shun Yueji with fear in their eyes. She lowered her head and didn't dare to breathe. Shun Yueji glanced at her lightly. Since it's your first offense, Ben Gong won't ask for your name today. Slap yourself 20 times and Ben Gong will pretend I didn't hear anything. Yes, thank you Imperial consort. The green-robed woman showed a look of gratitude and slapped herself hard on the face. After 20 slaps, her face was red and swollen. She endured the pain and let the maid beside her help her up. She was really obedient and didn't dare to say a word. She hid behind the concubines and acted as if she didn't exist. Seeing Jiao Dezhong come out, Shun Yueji no longer paid attention to the concubines present and walked towards Jiao Dezhong. When Jiao Dezhong saw her, he respectfully saluted, Imperial consort, please wait a moment, this servant will go in and report. Jiao Dezhong's words made all the concubines present show jealousy and envy. Sure enough, she was worthy of being the pearl of the Shun family. Look at this treatment. They had been waiting outside for a long time, and Jiao Gonggong directly told them to go back. The emperor didn't allow anyone to visit. But it was Shun Yueji. She hadn't even said anything, and he had already gone in to report. I've long heard that His Majesty treats older sister Imperial consort very well. This rumor has spread throughout the palace. At first, this concubine didn't believe it, But I didn't expect that His Majesty's treatment of older sister Imperial Consort is truly different from this concubine. Older sister Imperial Consort really makes all the younger sisters envious. That's right, that's right. In the harem, there really isn't any elder sister who is valued by His Majesty like the Empress. In the face of the concubine's words, one after another, Shun Yueji smiled slightly. Younger sisters are being too serious. Previously, the Empress' face was injured and there was some misunderstanding between us. In addition, Ben Gong also treated the rash on Empress Jejie's face, so it's understandable that His Majesty values Ben Gong more. It is most likely because of the Empress. Your Majesty loves the house and its crow. Imperial concubine, His Majesty invites you in. Jiao Dezhong came out from inside, walked in front of Shun Yueji, and respectfully made way for her. Facing the envious and jealous gazes of the crowd, Shun Yueji calmly and elegantly walked past them. Wu Shu. Chapter 123. I know what my sisters are thinking, but the Empress is the person whom the Emperor dotes on and protects. It's enough to hide some thoughts in your heart. There's no need to say it so openly, lest you lose your life. Thank you for reminding me, Imperial concubine. We will remember. All the concubines bowed respectfully. Shun Yueji smiled slightly and stepped into the hall, ignoring them. Your Majesty, my sister is back. She must be back. She came back to take revenge. Your Majesty, I'm so scared. It was my sister who did something wrong first. How could she? Empress, don't talk nonsense. On the phoenix bed, Jiu Yuerin's thin and helpless little body threw herself into the man's arms, sobbing. Your Majesty, you have to believe me. I really didn't do that to my sister. My relationship with my sister has always been the best. No matter what my sister did, I always remember the last sisterhood. How dare I dare to disrespect my sister? By the way, someone framed me. Someone must have framed me. Your Majesty, Yueshio and Mammy Li have been with me for so many years. I have long regarded them as my family. Now they died so tragically for no reason. Your Majesty, you must uphold justice for me and avenge them. I pay my respects to Your Majesty and Sister Empress. Jiu Yuerin's crying face immediately froze as a pleasant voice rang out in the hall. She looked towards the source of the voice. When she saw Shun Yueji's quiet and beautiful face, there was a vicious resentment in her eyes. Imperial concubine Shun? The three words were squeezed out of her teeth. Considering Feng Zhouqing's presence, Jiu Yuyin didn't show too much hostility. I heard that Sister Empress is sick, so I came to see her. Before coming in, I saw that the outside of Xianghe Palace was surrounded by many concubines. I think Sister Empress is usually friendly. When the younger sisters heard that Sister Empress is sick, they all came to see her. Huai Yang, bring up the tonic I sent to Her Majesty. Shun Yueji turned and ordered the servants behind her. Yes, Your Majesty. Huai Yang lowered his head and held the wooden box respectfully with both hands. The crimson wooden box was exquisite and small. It was made of the best nanmu. Taking the wooden box from Huai Yang's hands, Shun Yueji smiled. Your Majesty should have heard of this snow jade lotus, right? Hearing this, a hint of surprise flashed across Feng Zhouqing's clear eyes. She nodded. In the entire Feng country, there is only one snow jade lotus. It was a gift from an old man that old General Shun saved on the battlefield. It was rumored that the snow jade lotus had the effect of rejuvenating a person. It could regenerate festered skin in less than 7 days. Now that Shun Yueji had taken out the snow jade lotus, Feng Zhouqing couldn't help but feel shocked in his heart. The Jiu clan and the Shun clan had similar forces in the Feng nation, and they had always been at odds with each other. The relationship between the two clans was like fire and water, and Feng Zhouqing had seen all of this. Hearing Shui Yulian, Jiu Yuyin suddenly raised her head. She knew that the Shun family had a stalk of snow jade lotus and she had been thinking about it for a long time. Even if her face was not ruined, if she took the snow jade lotus, then her skin would be 100 times more tender and white than usual. It could be said to be a top-notch tonic. However, due to the preciousness of the snow jade lotus, she couldn't ask for it. Even Feng Zhouqing, who usually gave in to her and spoiled her, couldn't ask for it. Chapter 124. This snow jade lotus is especially precious to the Shun family. When one knew that Empress' older sister's injuries had worsened, this Kye wrote a letter and ordered someone to bring it to the general residence. After a long time of coaxing and pestering, this snow jade lotus was finally obtained for Empress' older sister. I know that the death of Yueshio and Mami Li made my sister sad and unacceptable. But after all, the dead can't come back to life. I believe that Yueshio and Mami Li in heaven don't want to see the Empress like this. Sister Empress, you should be strong. After all, you are the master of the 6 palaces, and the younger sisters still rely on you. She gestured for Jiao Dezhong to take the snow jade lotus from her hands. Feng Juqing looked at her and nodded. Imperial Consort is considerate. Previously it was Bengong's fault. I allowed the servants at my side to be disrespectful to Shen Guifei, but Shen Guifei did not care about the past and helped Bengong time and time again. It is Bengong's fault and Bengong should apologize to Shen Guifei. Jiu Yuyin grabbed the man's big hand and supported herself to stand up. She was about to bow to Shen Yueji. Shen Yueji was startled and quickly waved her hands. You can't do that. You can't do that. Sister Empress can't do that. You and I are both His Majesty's concubines, so we should share His Majesty's worries and difficulties. Now that Empress Jejie is injured like this, His Majesty's heart aches for you. Firstly, this Kye doesn't want His Majesty to be distracted by the matters of the Hugong. Secondly, in the days that we've been in the palace, Empress Jejie has treated this Kye sincerely. It's only natural that we help each other. Since this snow jade lotus has been delivered, this concubine will return first. Big Sister Empress should recuperate first. Your Majesty, please accompany Big Sister Empress. Huaiyang, follow me back. Shen Yueji bowed slightly and got up to leave. However, after she called out, she realized that the person behind her didn't move. She was surprised and couldn't help but call out again. The person kneeling on the ground still did not move. She became impatient and turned around. Huaiyang, have you turned a deaf ear to my words? How dare you be so presumptuous in front of His Majesty and the Empress? Your Majesty, please help this servant. Huaiyang suddenly shouted, his voice was deafening. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed heavily towards Feng Juqing. His bright and clean head smashed into the hard floor, and not long after, it turned red. The sudden scene caused Shen Yueji to be somewhat dumbfounded. Even Jiu Yuerin's expression changed. Her gaze was locked onto Huaiyang. She felt that this face was familiar, as if she had seen it somewhere before, but she couldn't remember who it was. Feng Juqing's gentle countenance turned gloomy as he looked at the little eunuch who was kowtowing on the ground. What decision do you want us to make? How dare you? You little eunuch have no manners. Yesterday, you carelessly knocked over Nyang Nyang's tea set. Nyang Nyang saw your uneasy appearance and felt sympathy, so she kept you by her side. Originally, she wanted to support you well, so she allowed you to come to Xionghe Palace to visit Empress. Who would have thought that you would do such a thing to my Nyang Nyang? After saying that, Shuangxi knelt on the ground angrily. Without waiting for the little eunuch to finish, she gritted her teeth and said righteously, Your Majesty, this little eunuch was just kept by this servant's Nyang Nyang yesterday. Now that he's seen Your Majesty, he's clamoring for Your Majesty to help him. He must be a spy that one of the palace's Nyang Nyang had arranged to harm this servant's Nyang Nyang. Your Majesty, please investigate clearly. Chapter 125. She felt the man's scrutinizing eyes on her. Shen Yueji hurriedly lifted her skirt and knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, I still don't know what happened, and it's not good for me to defend myself. Take him away. 2 secret guards in black pressed Huaiyang under their bodies and were ready to take him away. A glint flashed across Shen Yueji's pitch-black eyes. She was unsure of it. Feng Juqing didn't give him a chance to speak and directly ordered people to take him away. Was he protecting him? Because no one knew what the little eunuch was going to say after he spoke. She clenched her fists. Emperor, this minister's concubine is not afraid of a crooked shadow. Since this little eunuch asked the emperor to help him, then he must have some grievances. This minister's concubine also wants to hear it. This minister's concubine has no grudges with him and has never offended him. How exactly does he want to frame this minister's concubine? I beg your majesty to give this concubine some face and allow him to continue speaking, to return this concubine's innocence. Feng Jiuqing looked at her with disapproval in her eyes. Sometimes, once some words were spoken, it would be difficult to take them back. No matter what this eunuch wanted to say, he just needed to order people to take him away and kill him. No matter what bad words he said, it would have nothing to do with her. But once he opened his mouth, he couldn't protect her directly if it was something that was disadvantageous to her. He had always been clear about the intrigues in the harem, but he didn't point it out and let them do whatever they wanted. But Shen Yueji gave him a different feeling. He really wanted to protect her. Your Majesty, Imperial Concubine's sister is right. Since this eunuch said that he was wronged, Your Majesty should let him speak. If you continue to drag him away like this, it will be bad for Imperial Concubine's sister's reputation when people in the palace find out. They will mistakenly think that she has something to hide. I believe that according to Imperial Concubine's sister's character, she will never allow such a reputation to be hung on her head. Jiyu Yuyin grasped his hand, and there were still a few drops of tears in her almond-shaped eyes. Your Majesty, I believe Imperial Concubine's sister. Feng Jiuqing withdrew his hand from the woman's hands, got up, walked to the tea table not far away, and sat down. Imperial Concubine. Ah! Shen Yueji lifted her head and looked at the emperor with a confused expression when she was suddenly called. She saw the man stretch out his hand towards her. His fair hand was long and slender, and his handsome face was as handsome as the wind. His good-looking thin lips parted slightly, and the word gentle came out of his mouth. Come here. A sharp gaze came from her right, nailing her body like a knife. Every part of her body was in extreme pain. A smile appeared on Shen Yueji's face and she pretended not to see Jiyu Yuin's expression. She excitedly climbed up from the ground and quickly walked in front of the emperor. She placed her small hand on his palm. Your Majesty, you and elder sister Empress both believe in this concubine, right? Pulling a round chair for her, the man pressed her to sit beside him. Sit properly. The man's large hand rested on the back of the woman's hand, lightly tapping it. His indifferent gaze looked towards Huaiyang who was kneeling on the ground. Since the Empress and Guifei are pleading for you, Jin will give you this chance to speak. Speak. Hearing this, Huaiyang's face lit up, and he kowtowed several times. This servant admits that this servant did use my tragic life to win Imperial Concubine's sympathy yesterday, but what this servant is going to say next has nothing to do with Imperial Concubine. Huaiyang's words made the Emperor's furrowed brows relax for a moment. For some reason, when he heard that it had nothing to do with Shen Yueji, he actually relaxed a lot. He released Shen Yueji's hand, pulled her up from the round chair, and pushed her forward. Imperial Concubine, go to the side and stand. Chapter 126. Shen Yueji grimaced and glared at him secretly. Coincidentally, the emperor raised his eyes and glanced at her. She was so scared that she quickly recovered her well-behaved appearance. She walked to Shuangshi's side and stood there aggrievedly. The emperor fixed his eyes on her for a while and then looked at Huaiyang. Go on. Seeing this scene, Jiyu Yuyin couldn't help but clench her fists under the phoenix robe. Her bright eyes were tainted with resentment. She was a little proud in her heart, but when she heard Huaiyang say that it had nothing to do with her, she had a bad premonition and clenched her fists tighter and tighter. Jiyu Yuyin looked at the emperor softly. I want to talk about, is the eunuch of Her Majesty's Xianghe Palace, Eunuch Tang. Jiyu Yuyin trembled when she heard the words Eunuch Tang. No wonder she felt Huaiyang was familiar. Now, she finally knew who he was. Was it Huaiyang who was disfigured and skinned by Tang Cai? It was him. How could it be him? Why did he work in Shen Yueji's Fengqi Palace? For a moment, her face was full of colors, changing rapidly and extremely ugly. Jiyu Yuin's lips trembled when she saw the emperor's gaze fall on her. Her expression was full of helplessness. Your Majesty, Eunuch Tang is indeed my servant in the auspicious Harmony Palace. I don't know what Eunuch Tang has done to make you use Imperial Consort's sympathy to see His Majesty in person and beg His Majesty to help you. After saying that, she gave a pale smile. I didn't remember it just now. If I remember correctly, you should have worked in my Xionghe Palace before, right? Because you made a mistake, Eunuch Tang ordered people to beat you with a board and drive you out. At this time, without Yu Xiu and Mammy Li, Jiyu Yuyin realized how powerless she was to speak. If they were alive, they would have already defended her. I didn't make a mistake. It was Tang Cai, that beast. Your Majesty. Huai Yang's body trembled hard. Tang Cai, that beast, forced all the beautiful palace maids in Xionghe Palace to eat with him. Not only that, he didn't even let off the eunuchs. This face of your servant is impudent, Jiyu Yuyin scolded in a low voice. Huai Yang was so frightened that he immediately fell silent. Jiyu Yuyin exuded a dignified aura, and her face, which was hidden under the veil, was filled with a cold intent. What do you take my auspicious Harmony Palace for? Eunuch Tang was personally promoted by this empress. How could he do such a despicable thing? Huai Yang, have you forgotten how you were chased out by this consort? Your Majesty, Huai Yang is a narrow-minded person. At that time, he had only done something wrong and was reprimanded by Tang Cai and bore a grudge against him, causing him to be embarrassed many times. Tang Cai was kind and only chased him out of Xionghe Palace and did not take his life. This official concubine did not think that this Huai Yang would use just a few words to win Noble Consortion's trust and use Noble Consortion to meet your Majesty to frame Tang Eunuch. I didn't. If your Highness the Empress doesn't believe me, you can summon Tang Cai over for a face-to-face confrontation. Jiyu Yuyin sneered, what harm is there in that? Bengong would like to see how a selfish villain like you can measure the heart of a gentleman. Guards. Chapter 127. Servant Tang Cai greets your Majesty, Empress, and Imperial Consort. The one who came in was a middle-aged man with an exquisite appearance. Why was he called a man? It was because his temperament was different from those eunuchs in the palace who were over 50 years old and had some power. He was tall and slender, with a fair face and didn't look old. It was hard for such a person to be called a eunuch. In comparison, he looked more like the master of an aristocratic family. A young master of an aristocratic family. When she saw Tang Cai, Shen Yueji was a little surprised. Especially since he was neither servile nor overbearing, giving off an aura of victory. She thought to herself that if he wasn't fully prepared, he wouldn't have such an expression. It seemed like Huai Yang was going to suffer. Without her, he probably wouldn't be able to keep his life. It's him. It's him. Compared to Tang Cai's gentleness, when Huai Yang saw him, he was very agitated. His face was filled with fear as he pointed at him and trembled. There are many maids and eunuchs in the palace who were tortured by him. They were all unwilling to eat with him. If your Majesty doesn't believe this servant, you can call them over and have a face-to-face confrontation. Previously, I only hit you a few dozen times because you did something wrong. I didn't expect you to hold a grudge against me until now. In front of your Majesty and Empress, you're slandering me. You can even make up such a shameful thing to frame me and humiliate me. Your Majesty, this servant has been in the palace for so many years and has never done anything over the line. Since he has spoken to this extent, why don't your Majesty summon all the people that he said had an affair with this servant and confront them face to face? Let's see if this servant is really as he said, that he has done all sorts of bad things in the inner palace. The space between the emperor's brows was gloomy. His warm and moist lips were cold and tightly pressed together like ice. His dark eyes made people not dare to look at him directly. He waved his hand. Jiao Dezhong memorized the names of the eunuchs and maids in Xionghe Palace from Huai Yang's mouth. Not long after, the people Huai Yang spat out were all brought into the main hall. They were all trembling in fear. They had never seen such a scene before. They knelt on the ground with pale faces. Eunuch Tang has been very good to us. Because a few days ago, Huai Yang accidentally knocked over the Empress's most treasured glass cup and was beaten by Eunuch Tang. He has always held a grudge against Eunuch Tang, so he spoke nonsense and deliberately framed Eunuch Tang. Your Majesty, our words are absolutely true. Eunuch Tang and the Empress are the same. Eunuch Tang and Empress, we have never treated us as servants and has always been very good to us. Eunuch Tang and Eunuch Tang. In the face of everyone's rebuttals and accusations of his wrongdoings, he didn't dare to do so. Huai Yang's lips were pale, and he murmured dully, "It's not like that, it's not like that. That's not what you said at that time. Lil Hua Zi, you said that Tang Ci forced you, took off your clothes, and beat you. You said that Tang Ci bit off the flesh on your chest, and you were in so much pain that you couldn't get out of bed for a few days. Little Li, did you forget how you were lying on the bed covered in blood and I carried you out? You said your life here was worse than death. You said you wanted to escape, you. Little Zhong. Enough." Chapter 128. Everyone in the room was silent. Huai Yang fell to the ground in a daze. He didn't seem to understand how things had developed to this point. They had agreed that as long as he had the chance, he would tell everyone about Tang Cai's evil deeds. They had agreed that they would help him prove it. It was just death. Instead of living like this, they would rather fight to the death. But why didn't they admit it? Why did they keep blaming him? He was helping them, helping them. Feng Jiuqing's handsome face was calm, and his crimson lips opened slightly. "What else do you have to say?" Huai Yang clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and his lips were bleeding. His eyes were full of stubbornness. "I still have evidence. There is a secret room under Tang Cai's residence. It is filled with his torture tools, and there are many skeletons of the palace maids and eunuchs who were imprisoned by him. Eunuch Tang. Your Highness, I am here." Jiyu Yuyin raised her eyebrows. "Did you hear what he said?" "Yes, I heard it." Tang Cai had a smile on his face as he looked at Huai Yang as if he was looking at someone who was about to die. Jiyu Yuyin sighed softly. "No matter what happened in the past, you are now a servant of the Phoenix Perch Palace. Since Imperial Consort Shen brought you here and Bengong owes Imperial Consort Shen many favors, Bengong will trust you once more for Imperial Consort Shen's sake. Since you said there is a secret room in Eunuch Tang's residence, I will bring people to follow you to confirm it. Huai Yang, if there is no secret room, this time, not only His Majesty, but I will also demand an explanation for Eunuch Tang." Huai Yang wiped the tears on his face and climbed up from the ground. "I will prove to His Majesty that I did not lie. There is indeed a secret room in Tang Cai's residence. I will take His Majesty to see it now." "Wait." Shen Yueji suddenly spoke when Huai Yang's voice fell. Huai Yang suddenly stopped and looked back at Shen Yueji. "You are just a little servant. Are you worthy of His Majesty to follow you to the residence of a eunuch? What do you think His Majesty is? His Majesty is the sovereign of the 9-5. How could he be ordered around by servants like you?" "Right, Your Majesty." At this point, Shen Yueji winked at the emperor. Feng Jiuqing's expression was originally displeased, but after hearing Shen Yueji's words, he helplessly held his forehead. "Imperial consort, don't be rude. Of course, this servant is also human. Plus, if what Huai Yang said is true, then many of the eunuchs and palace maids in Auspicious Harmony Palace have been poisoned by Eunuch Tang. Since Elder Sister Empress is the mistress of Auspicious Harmony Palace, then Elder Sister Empress has failed in her duty." Seeing Jiyu Yuerin's ugly expression, Shen Yueji smiled faintly. Although this concubine's words aren't very pleasant to hear, they are also reasonable. If this had happened in this concubine's Phoenix Perch Palace, it would be the same. Seeing how Elder Sister Empress was defending Eunuch Tang, it seemed that she didn't know anything. "When I was in the Fu, father and mother often nagged in my ears, 'You may know a person's face, but you don't know his heart.' Since Eunuch Tang feels that he is righteous, he naturally isn't afraid that Huai Yang will lead his men to search." Chapter 129. Then, this consort is also willing to be punished together with Huai Yang, to show this consort's guilt of judging someone unkind, and to spare Big Sister Empress cultivation. This matter concerns me as well as Sister Empress's responsibility to protect Eunuch Tang. With these two reasons, it's no longer condescending to invite Your Majesty to visit Eunuch Tang's residence. What do you think, Your Majesty? Feng Zhouqing's eyes flickered as he stared at her smiling face. This girl. He got up and brushed his dragon robe with his beautiful fingers. As Imperial Concubine said, "It's rare for me to be free. I'll go with you to Tang Cai's residence." Jiu Yuerin's face was injured, so she couldn't go there. Her gaze met with Tang Cai's, and when she received a reassuring look from him, her lips curled up into a smile, and she ordered one of her close attendants to go in her place. Huayang is young and he is very vengeful. Not only does he lie, but he also wants to put people to death. It's hard for such a ruthless person to deceive the kind and innocent Imperial Concubine. Since Imperial Consort Mai has the intention to seek justice for him, Ben Gong can't say anything. Let His Majesty be the witness. If we go to Eunuch Tang's residence and we don't see what Huayang said, this concubine will be guilty of covering up and will be left to His Majesty and Empress Jejia to decide. Feng Zhouqing held her hand and walked out. Before leaving the hall, he paused and pursed his lips. Ignorant people are not guilty. Imperial concubine can't be considered as covering up. The man's words made Jiu Yuyin raise her head and look at him in disbelief. The emperor's tall and slender body had already walked out of the hall, and his clothes were ugly. Jiu Yuyin bit her lips so hard that they bled. Her deep eyes were filled with viciousness. Shen Yueji had only been in the palace for half a month, and he was so protective of her. First Jiu Yuyin, then Shen Yueji. Her long nails dug into her palms, and drops of blood dyed the brocade quilt red. The pungent smell of blood made Jiu Yuyin absent-minded. She tried so hard to get rid of Jiu Yuqin, to get rid of her biological sister and replace her. She would never forget how long he had ignored her on the day of Jiu Yuqin's death. He drank alone until he was dead drunk. She was worried about him and went to persuade him. If she hadn't been prepared, he would have killed her long ago. Later, because of her father and mother entering the palace, she didn't know what they did to him, but he finally started to like her. The rims of Jiu Yuerin's eyes reddened. Everyone in the palace knew that she was favored. They knew that ever since he ascended to the throne, he had been staying in her Xionghe palace every day. When the concubines talked, they were all envious and jealous. But only he himself knew. What had he been doing all these nights? In front of him, a beautiful woman like a flower could not compare to a dead man. Jiu Yuyin smashed her fist on the pillow. Her small hand instantly swelled up and dark red blood flowed down the edge of the pillow. In order to get him, she really couldn't care less about the last bit of modesty of a woman. In the end, what she got in return was an understatement from him. "Empress, it's cold. Put on your clothes and be careful not to catch a cold." Even so, Jiu Yuyin refused to admit defeat. Jiu Yuqin was already dead. The one who would accompany him now was her, Jiu Yuyin. Even if he hadn't touched her, so what? There was still a long time. Although he hadn't touched her, he hadn't taken a step into the chambers of the concubines in the inner palace. At least in the eyes of others, the emperor stayed at her place every night and was devoted to her. The two of them were deeply in love. This was enough. Chapter 130. But Shen Yueji's appearance, Jiu Yuerin's cold eyes suddenly narrowed. A dangerous aura spread around her. How could he be so gentle and protective of her? She would never forget the way he looked at Shen Yueji. Even if she died, she would never forget it. That could only be seen on Jiu Yuqin. Even on her, his gentleness had never appeared. He seemed to be affectionate, but in the depths of his gentle eyes, there was indifference and hatred. He didn't love her. He didn't. Shen Yuji. The coldness in his eyes burst out layer by layer. She was obviously not a person to be feared. Why did the emperor suddenly treat her so well? What kind of magical power did she have? Or was it just because of her beautiful face? "Your Highness, third young master asks for an audience." The maid's voice brought Jiu Yuyin back to reality. Her ferocious and terrifying face slowly returned to normal. She looked at the maid kneeling on the ground carefully. "Third brother?" "Your Majesty." On the way, Shen Yueji watched the dragon carriage stop. Gao Dezhong suddenly went forward and leaned over to the emperor's ear and said a few words. "I don't know where the courage comes from." Shen Yueji puts her little head over, But before she can get close to the king, her head is held by the man's beautiful big hand. She can't get close, so she can only retreat with a sad face and sit down. The emperor's expression didn't change. After listening to Gao Dezhong's words, his gaze fell on her little face that was full of resentment. Shen Yueji turned her head away awkwardly. Nothing. The emperor's third brother came to the palace. Sister Empress third brother? Jiyu Jinkai? Shen Yueji's words made the emperor frown. Your Highness, you know the Jiyu family's third young master? Oh, Shen Yueji scratched her head and smiled awkwardly. We should be familiar with each other. When I was in the capital with Big Brother, we met a hooligan who was molesting a woman, so we taught him a good lesson. Later, we found out that the person we beat up was the Jiyu family's third young master. Hey. Feng Zhouqing wasn't the emperor back then, and the Jiyu family wasn't as powerful as they were now. The feud between the Jiyu and Shen families had always existed. Jiyu Yuan Kai had been beaten black and blue in the past, so how could the Jiyu family let them off so easily? However, these are all old matters of mine. Shen Yueji rubbed her chin. Then, she thought of something and her expression turned ugly. Noticing the change in her mood, Feng Zhouqing felt rather helpless. What's wrong with Imperial Consort? Why is it that Empress Jejie's older brother can enter and leave the Imperial Palace as he pleases, but why is it that this Kie's older brother was only allowed to enter the Imperial Palace to see this Kie once after this Kie pleaded with the Emperor? Feng Zhouqing glanced at her lazily. When did I say that I only need you to meet Shen Yukai? You didn't tell me. Shen Yueji pondered over Feng Zhouqing's words seriously. She recalled the day when she asked Feng Zhouqing to allow Shen Yukai to enter the palace. Feng Zhouqing had indeed agreed to her request and did not say that they would only meet once. In that case, Shen Yueji's eyes lit up, and she grabbed the emperor's hand. Does this mean that this Kie's older brother will be able to enter the Imperial Palace freely to see me like Empress Jejie? Chapter 131. Shen Yueji didn't care about his status or etiquette. She just wanted to prove to Feng Zhouqing that her guess was right or not. She grabbed the emperor's hand with her claws again. Feng Zhouqing tried to brush her hand away but failed. He looked into her sparkling eyes and corrected her. I can only enter and exit your Phoenix Perch Palace, not the palace. What? Shen Yueji pouted. My brother is a gentleman. Your Majesty, are you suspecting that my brother can do anything to your Majesty's beauties? Feng Zhouqing twisted his fingers and held her hand in his palm. He said with a faint smile, I'm afraid that your son's attire will scare the people in the palace. Shen Yueji was speechless. Your Majesty, Imperial Concubine, we've arrived at Tang Cai's residence. Shen Yueji had been silent all along the way except for the few words she exchanged with the man. She had a feeling that Jiyu Ruochi's sudden entry into the palace had something to do with her. The emperor was sitting next to her. He could see her every move, but she couldn't make it too obvious. After hearing Gao Dezhong's words, she raised her head and looked at Tang Cai's residence. In the palace, all the concubines, eunuchs, and palace maids lived in a palace that was not far from their bedchambers. It represented their identity and status. Only the concubines, eunuchs, and palace maids would live in the same temple and temple. It was said that Tang Cai's palace was personally given to him by Jiyu Yuyin. Compared to the bedchambers of the concubines, his palace was incomparable. But compared to the residence of the eunuchs and the palace maids who had some power in the palace, his palace was undoubtedly luxurious. Just one person's residence was enough to support 3 palace's servants. Sure enough, when she saw the displeasure in the emperor's eyes, Shen Yueji followed behind the emperor and got off the dragon carriage without saying a word. Tang Cai had been in the palace for so many years that he was very good at reading people's expressions. He saw the expression on the emperor's face without a change. He hurriedly bowed. This palace is bestowed by the empress. There are many rare treasures inside, and it is also the empress' high regard for this servant. This servant has always been afraid and has never dared to live in this palace. Most of the time, I have stayed in a small side hall of the Empress Palace in case the Empress summons me and delay time. Tang then knew the position the Empress held in the Emperor's heart and specially used her name to block it. Seeing that the displeasure between the emperor's brows had dissipated a little, he let out a long breath and took the lead to lead the way. Shun Yueji followed behind the emperor and found a place to sit. Jiao Dezhong cleared his throat and looked towards the trembling Huai Yang. According to what you said, His Majesty and the imperial consort are both here. Since you said that eunuch Tang has a secret room, let's take a look. Huai Yang crawled up from the ground and walked towards Tang Cai. He passed by Tang Cai's side and received a disdainful and proud look. The fear that came from his heart caused his expression to tense up. The decorations inside the hall were not as grand and luxurious as the ones outside. There were signs that it had been moved. Even some of the items on the bookshelves had been burned. It looked like it had been adjusted in advance. She carefully observed everything in the hall. A short while later, Shun Yueji's gaze looked towards Huai Yang. She saw him walk behind a bookshelf. There was a painting hanging on the right side of the bookshelf. He pointed at the painting with a trembling hand. Chapter 132. A top-notch splash ink landscape painting. Shun Yueji smiled slightly. What's here? The switch to the secret room is here, Huai Yang said with certainty. This servant has come to this place several times. Every time Tang Cai brought this servant here, he would first lift up the painting and turn the switch inside. The bookshelf would then move away. The emperor nodded slightly. A black-robed bodyguard stepped forward and lifted the scroll. The smooth wall was no different from the color outside the painting. The black-clothed guard dutifully stretched out his hand and touched the wall behind the painting. It was smooth and did not seem to have any mechanism. He took the painting down, and the clean and neat wall looked no different from the one beside it. Seeing the scene in front of him, Huai Yang's eyes widened. On the other hand, Tang Cai could not hide his smugness. How could this be? Huai Yang's eyes widened in shock, and he ran over in disbelief. His hands kept moving on the clean wall, looking for something. It shouldn't be like this. I remember very clearly that there was a round lion's head under the painting. As long as the lion's head was turned, the secret room on the bookshelf would open. Why is it gone? How dare you, Huai Yang? Tang Cai scolded angrily. At that time, I saw that you were being bullied at such a young age. It was very pitiful, so I kept you by my side. In addition, you were smart and nimble, so I originally planned to put you in an important position and promote you. I wanted to give you more opportunities so that you wouldn't just be an obscure little eunuch. I didn't expect that you would actually frame me in front of His Majesty and Imperial Consort Niang. Your Majesty, Imperial Concubine. Now that the truth has been revealed, I really don't have any secret room here. Your Majesty and Imperial Concubine, you must help me. I have been working hard and loyal in the palace all these years. How could I have done such a disgraceful, shameless, and vicious thing? No, it's not like that. Your Majesty, don't listen to his nonsense. I saw it with my own eyes. Half of my face was ruined by him. He scalded it and peeled it off my face. Your Majesty, I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth. Your Majesty, you have to believe me. Huai Yang frantically crawled up from the ground and ran to the bookshelf. He frantically searched the bookshelf with his hands. Countless books fell to the ground, and porcelain vases shattered into pieces. He messed up the bookshelves. The hard and smooth wall was no different from the other walls. He slammed his hands on the wall. His clenched fists were bleeding, but he still slammed them hard. Fresh blood flowed down the clean wall, a ghastly sight. It must be here, it must be here, it's empty, it's empty. Feng Joqing sat on the round chair without moving. Shun Yueji looked at him. The man's elegant appearance was surprisingly calm, and his gentle and elegant eyes were clear and elegant. His slender fingers lightly tapped on the table, knocking on it from time to time. Even Shun Yueji couldn't figure out what Feng Joqing was trying to do. Your Majesty. The man raised his hand slightly. She immediately shut her mouth when she saw this. Only the sound of Huai Yang's fists smashing against the walls with all his might could be heard in the huge palace, and the sound of his fists could be described as deafening. Chapter 133. It was as if he couldn't feel the pain. The only truth of the matter, the only chance to prove his innocence and expose Tang Cai's crimes. Even if he died, he would never have thought that things would turn out like this. All his hopes were shattered at this moment. He practically didn't need to turn around to be able to imagine Tang Cai's complacent face. Yes, he was an old man in the palace after all. When the late emperor was alive, no one could compare to his position in the harem. After the death of the late emperor and the ascension of the new emperor, he followed the empress and was deeply valued by the empress. He was just a little eunuch who had entered the palace for less than a year. How could he be compared to his power in the harem? In the huge Xianghe palace, all the servants listened to his orders. They were all his eyes. Even the servants outside the Xianghe palace didn't dare to offend him. His every move was seen by him. Before he came, he had already made full preparations. All the explanations and excuses were useless in the end. Huai Yang fell down dispiritedly. He should have known this would happen. He should have known. Shen Yueji poured a cup of tea for the man and handed it over. She said lightly, "Huai Yang, what else do you have to say now?" Huai Yang fell to the ground powerlessly. His soul was sucked out and he was like a puppet. You framed eunuch Tang for eating with the servants of Xianghe Palace. You lied that Tang Cai killed the palace maids and eunuchs of Xianghe Palace. It has been proven time and time again, but it has been broken. Now, what evidence do you have to frame eunuch Tang? I know that no matter what I say now, the imperial concubine and His Majesty won't believe my words. But I dare to swear to God that if there is any falsehood in what I said, I will die a horrible death. I will die without a corpse. Hearing this, Shen Yueji laughed. The harem is not a place for you to swear. What can your oath represent? She sighed softly. In front of the truth, the more you say, the easier it is to be sneered at. The so-called truth, if people have complete confidence, they won't dare to point it out with confidence. Not to mention you, a person who bites the hand that feeds him and talks nonsense. I am not talking nonsense. Everything this servant has said is the truth, not a single word of falsehood. Huai Yang's emotions were agitated. The moment he suddenly stood up and pounced towards Tang Cai, he was restrained by the black-clothed guards beside him. He struggled with all his might, his eyes filled with hatred. Tang Cai, do you dare to swear? Do you dare to swear to God that you've never done these things? Tang Cai sneered, your servant is upright and not afraid of a crooked shadow, why wouldn't I dare? Double happiness. This servant is here. Slap yourself 30 times. Yes. Taking advantage of the time when double happiness came forward, Shen Yueji poured another cup of tea for the man. You dare to be so impudent in front of His Majesty and Ben Gong. It seems that Empress Jejia was right, you really don't know the rules. These 30 slaps will be a lesson for you. After 30 slaps, Huai Yang's face swelled up, the corners of his mouth split open, and dark red blood flowed out from the corners of his mouth. He stretched out his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He knelt on the ground, his body in a sorry state. Your servant knows his wrongs. Double happiness. Your Highness. Give him another 20 slaps, let him remember the consequences of using Ben Gong. Yes. Chapter 134. Your Majesty, as this concubine's servant of Phoenix Perch Palace, this concubine has punished and vented my anger. Next, it's up to Empress Sister. You decide. Feng Juqing elegantly took a sip of tea and turned a deaf ear to her words. His slender fingers gently twisted the lid of the teacup. After a moment, he said, since Imperial Concubine said that he is a servant of Feng Chi Palace, then let Imperial Concubine deal with him personally. Your Majesty, Tang Cai could not believe what he heard. Until the Emperor's gloomy eyes looked at him, Tang Cai's heart skipped a beat and he quickly lowered his head. Yes. Yes. Your Majesty is right. No matter how bad Huai Yang is, he is still a servant of Imperial Concubine Feng Chi Palace. Imperial Concubine has always been fair in dealing with things. I believe that Imperial Concubine will give me a satisfactory answer. Isn't Your Majesty making things difficult for me? Although I come from a family of generals, I have never killed anyone. This Huai Yang offended his superiors and dared to speak arrogantly in front of Your Majesty. He has already been sentenced to death. Shun Yueji held the man's hand and said in a coquettish tone, "Your Majesty, if you let me deal with him, I will be afraid." Feng Juqing looked down at her. There was a smile between his handsome eyebrows. Taking advantage of him, Shun Yueji stood up straight and walked in front of Hua Yang. She looked down at his swollen and blood-stained face from above. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Tang Cai, who was kneeling on the side. "Since this is a grudge between you two, Eunuch Tang, how do you want me to deal with it?" The spearhead was thrown to him. For a moment, Tang Cai was also in a dilemma. This reckless Hua Yang dared to report his scandal to the emperor. As long as he did not die, there would be a second time. With the empress protecting him, he was not afraid. But he was also an old man in the palace, so he naturally knew this principle. If he asked Shun Yueji to get rid of him, it would mean that he did not put imperial concubine Shun in his eyes and did not give her any face. Almost with this sentence, Tang Cai concluded that this imperial concubine Shun was not simple. He knelt on the ground, and when he heard that, he raised his head in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Shun Guifei treats people benevolently and there is no lack of servants by her side. This Hua Yang first held a position in the Empress Auspicious Harmony Palace, but because this servant criticized him a few times, he bore a grudge against this servant and wanted this servant dead. It doesn't matter if this servant's reputation suffers a bit of damage, but this matter is related to the noble consort. If one day, Hua Yang does something wrong and is reprimanded by the noble consort, at that time, it would be hard for this person to not remember the noble consort's kindness and bite back, causing the noble consort to fall into danger. Shun Yueji smiled faintly. "It was my negligence that almost caused Eunuch Tang to lose his life. I didn't think that Eunuch Tang not only didn't feel estranged from me, but also thought about my safety in the future. This is truly worthy of gratitude." Tang Cai said with a fawning smile, "What is Imperial Consort Niang Niang saying?" Imperial Consort Niang Niang was also bewitched by this servant and blinded. "Imperial Consort Niang Niang has a kind heart. How can this servant be disrespectful? The palace that Empress Jejie bestowed upon you was destroyed by Hua Yang. It is truly a pity." Looking at the large pool of blood on the clean wall, there were also many small pieces of flesh that fell from the back of Hua Yang's hand stuck to it. It could be seen how much strength he used to smash the wall. Chapter 135. Hua Yang, are you treating me and His Majesty as fools? If there's a secret room inside, how can the wall be so thick? You've punched it several times, but this hard stone wall isn't damaged at all. Why don't you grow some brains when you've spent so much effort to frame Eunuch Tang? Hua Yang's face was pale. Facing Shun Yueji's seemingly indifferent reprimand, he lowered his head and restrained the hatred and anger in his eyes. As she spoke, Shun Yueji walked towards another wall. This wall looked no different from the previous one. It was clean and spotless, and there were no extra decorations on it. It looked just like a wall. On the contrary, Tang Cai's expression changed when he saw her suddenly walking towards that wall. Something flashed across his pitch-black eyes. Shun Yueji caught it very quickly. It was a kind of fear called panic. Her beautiful lips curved into a smile, and her hand carelessly touched the wall. Eunuch Tang's palace looks quite unique. Tang Cai lowered his head shakily, not wanting her to see the fear on his face. He said respectfully, "This palace is a gift from Her Majesty. Her Majesty has always liked simple and elegant places, so it's naturally unique. Although Hua Yang is one of my people, he did something wrong after all and offended Eunuch Tang. Just now, I had double happiness beat him, which can be considered as a punishment for deceiving me. Next is the personal grudge between him and Eunuch Tang. If I punish him lightly, I will feel sorry for Eunuch Tang. But if I punish him heavily, Hua Yang can't escape death, and I really don't want to kill people." So, she changed the topic. "Eunuch Tang, don't refuse. Tell me directly. Do you want to kill him or torture him in some way? Only then will it be enough to vent your anger." Tang Cai could understand the first part of the sentence, but the latter part made him have a bad feeling. He knelt on the ground and tried to keep his voice calm. This servant doesn't understand what Imperial Consort Tang wants to say. "Hua Yang, He rumbled. A deafening sound caused Tang Cai to abruptly stop speaking. His face, which was covered in white powder, turned completely pale when he saw that the secret room on the wall had been opened. As the wall moved to the left and right, Shin Yueji didn't know where her hand had touched. Seeing the scene in front of her, she quickly retracted her hand in shock and jogged back to the emperor. "Your Majesty, why did the wall split by itself? What did I just do? It's here. This is the place." Huai Yang excitedly crawled up from the ground when he saw the secret room open. His bruised and swollen face was once again filled with hope. "It's here." He excitedly pointed at the secret room, those corpses, those palace maids and eunuchs that were tortured by Tang Cai, they are all inside. If your Majesty and Imperial Consortium do not believe, you can personally go in and take a look. Everything in here can prove Tang Cai's evil deed. Your Majesty, Imperial Consortium, you can't listen to his nonsense. This secret room is where the servants usually pile up their junk. There really isn't anything here. Tang Cai couldn't care less about etiquette and rules. He frantically climbed up from the ground and pressed down on the other side of the wall with both hands. He then saw the secret room that had just been opened close up at a slow speed with a creaking sound. Tang Cai's head was full of sweat and he could no longer maintain his calm. Chapter 136. Feng Jiuqing's handsome face was expressionless as he raised his hand. The black-clothed guard pushed Tang Cai away and pressed his hand on the place he had just pressed. The secret room opened again. The emperor stood up. Tang Cai felt completely panicked this time. He crawled to the door of the secret room and tried to block the entrance. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." Before he could block the secret room, his body was lifted by the black-clothed guard and thrown far away. Tang Cai wanted to crawl again, but a sharp blade was placed on his neck. He moved slightly and the sharp blade slashed across his neck. There was a sharp pain on his neck and red blood flowed down his neck. He was so scared that he lay on the ground and did not dare to move. Huai Yang walked in front and led the way. His voice was trembling with excitement. "Your Majesty, Imperial Concubine, please follow me." Shin Yueji wanted to refuse, but in the next moment, her hand was pulled by the emperor's big hand. She wanted to struggle. "Your Majesty, I am timid. If what Huai Yang said is true, I am afraid that I will not be able to sleep at night if I really see the tragedy inside. Imperial Concubine made a mess, how can I help you clean it up? Your Majesty, you must believe me. I really touched it by accident. I don't know where I touched. How would I know that there is a secret room here?" The emperor looked at her with his dark eyes and did not speak. Shin Yueji felt wronged and pouted. "Your Majesty, you don't believe me. Whether I believe you or not, I will not do anything to you. What are you wronged about?" Feng Jiuqing laughed. He did not give her a chance to complain. "Go in and see." She was pulled into the secret room by the emperor. On the way, Shin Yueji stood still. The emperor was not angry and chuckled. "Does Imperial Concubine want me to carry you in?" Hearing this, Shin Yueji's body stiffened. She could only follow behind the emperor and let him lead her like a dog. Later, Shin Yueji realized that she did not need the emperor to lead her and quickly caught up. The emperor did not walk fast, but Shin Yueji struggled to catch up. She ran hard to catch up, but the emperor suddenly stopped moving. Her nose hit the emperor's back and she immediately covered her nose in pain. The man's body was tall and straight, not moving an inch. She sensed that something was wrong and walked past Feng Jiuqing to stand beside him. When she saw the group of naked men and women tied to the wooden pillars and beds in the secret chamber, she felt a chill run down her spine. Shin Yueji had clearly imagined what it would be like inside, but when she saw it, she realized how much her heart was stirred. They were stripped of their clothes. Those who were locked up in the secret room did not have anything covering their bodies. Their bodies were full of scars. Their clean chests had traces of being whipped, and even the area between their legs, the only thing that was clean was their faces. Regardless of whether they were palace maids or eunuchs, every one of them could be considered delicate and beautiful. Their mouths were stuffed with cloth strips, and their faces were sticky with their tears. Their arrival caused their dejected and helpless mood to suddenly become excited. Their crippled arms trembled, and their thighs that were missing a leg kept struggling. The stench of blood here wasn't very strong. Only after experiencing Tang Cai's inhumane torture would the stench of blood fill the sky and cover the earth. And every time after the end, Tang Cai would personally clean up the mess. Most of these imprisoned palace maids and eunuchs were not forced by him. Chapter 137. The more they struggled, the more they resisted. He used the whip to lash their bodies. Some of them struggled too hard and hurt him. He directly cut off an arm or a leg from their body. Shun Yueji looked at the pretty palace made with nails in her eyes. Her mouth was gagged and only her ears were trembling as she listened to the movements around her. She felt that the emperor's gaze was on the palace made with nails in her eyes, just like her. She was lost in thought for a long time. There was a hint of coldness on his clear face. It was as if the warm summer had suddenly turned into winter, and the warm spring water had frozen in an instant. The temperature in the secret room was not cold, but the anger and majesty that emanated from the emperor made the atmosphere in the secret room drop to the lowest point. There was a numbness that made people tremble in fear. Shun Yueji was the closest to Feng Jiuqing. She could feel the endless anger that emanated from his body. When a gentle man who treated others warmly and rarely lost his temper, once he lost his temper, no one would be able to endure his rage. She would not forget that the man in front of her was not just Feng Jiuqing. He was a man. He was also the emperor of Feng country, the only emperor in the world. He controlled the life and death of everyone in the world. He held everyone's life in his hands. Huai Yang walked forward and removed the cloth from the mouth of a eunuch who was tied to a stone pillar. The ropes that bound him were very heavy. Every rope was very tight and deep, as if it had sunk into his flesh. When Huai Yang helped him untie the ropes, red marks could be seen on his wrists. A long section of the rope had sunk into his flesh, and he let out a pitiful cry. Huai Yang's movements were very careful as he carefully untied the ropes. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty, save me! Your Majesty, save me!" The young eunuch who had been freed was crawling towards Feng Jiuqing in a sorry state. Wherever he went, a large pool of blood would spread out from his body. His face was filled with tears. "Your Majesty, you recognize this servant. When this servant was working in auspicious Harmony Palace, you even praised this servant for being smart." Feng Jiuqing looked down at him. The delicate little eunuch's body had been tortured to the point that only his face was still intact. Speaking of which, he only felt that the person in front of him was somewhat familiar. "Guards." His voice was low and deep, unlike his usual gentleness. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the guards in black grabbing Tang Cai, who was planning to escape, and bringing him back. Tang Cai knelt on the ground, his forehead was covered in cold sweat, his back was also drenched in sweat. He knelt on the ground and continuously kowtowed. "Emperor, spare me, this servant knows he was wrong." "Slave." The emperor pursed his lips and laughed coldly. "So eunuch Tang still knows that you're a servant." "Your Majesty, your servant, your servant." Feng Jiuqing's gaze swept across the palace maids and eunuchs who had been mutilated. The eerie glint in his eyes grew colder and colder. There was a faint sign of ice forming. "Imperial consort, please spare my life. Your Highness, this servant really knows his mistake. Please plead with His Majesty, for the sake of this servant serving the Empress with all my heart." "The Empress?" The Emperor shot a cold glare at him. Realizing what he had said, Tang Cai wanted to shut his mouth, but it was already too late. "Emperor." Chapter 138. No matter how capable Tang Cai is, he can't do whatever he wants in the harem. These matters have been brought to the Empress, but... "How dare you?" Shun Yueji reprimanded him. Huai Yang shut his mouth in fear. Shun Yueji stared at him coldly and said angrily, "Huai Yang, what kind of person do you think the Empress is? Everyone in the palace knows that the Empress treats people with kindness. If Tang Cai really did such a thing, would the Empress cover it up for him?" Tang Cai's lips trembled as he knelt on the ground. Now that things had come to this point, seeing the tragic state of the secret chamber was still a good thing. If it was him, Perhaps the current him would have already become a cold corpse. Bring him back to Xionghe Palace. The emperor said these words coldly. He strode out with a wave of his dragon robe. Shen Yueji looked at the emperor who was leaving and then looked at the mess in the secret room. She waved her hand and said, "Double happiness, order people to settle them down first. We'll see what the emperor thinks." "Yes, your highness." She followed the emperor out of the secret room. This was the first time Shen Yueji saw Feng Zhouqing so angry. She knew that he treated the people like his children, including the eunuchs and maids in the palace. If they didn't make a big mistake, he would never punish them. He could still talk with her casually just now because he didn't see the terrible scene in the secret room. Now, not only Feng Zhouqing, but even Shen Yueji's heart was heavy. She had always thought that Jiyu Yuyin was only like this to her. At least to others, even though they were neither relatives nor friends, she should have a conscience in her heart. Plus, she was the empress now. How could she allow such a thing to happen? In the end, she thought she was too kind. "Emperor, perhaps you've misunderstood the empress. The empress is a daughter of a noble family and is now the empress of Feng country. Her every move is seen by others. How could she allow her servants in the palace to do such an evil and despicable thing?" She wrapped her arms around the man's arm gently. Only then did she realize that his handsome face was terrifyingly gloomy. She couldn't see through Feng Zhouqing's thoughts and didn't know what he wanted to do now. "That palace maid's eyes are filled with nails." These few words were spoken with a slight tremble in her voice. Shen Yueji listened quietly. This concubine has seen it. It is indeed quite pitiful. The man's dark eyes looked at her, and there seemed to be endless pain and torture in them. After a long time, he finally shifted his gaze away. Jun Xiao's face was a little paler, and he smiled. We saw her helplessness, her pain. Even minor injuries on a daily basis are painful, not to mention this nail piercing into the eye and torturing the flesh so cruelly. In my opinion, even if Eunuch Tang were to be chopped by 1,000 knives, it would still be difficult to make up for his crimes. The hand under the dragon robe suddenly tightened, and the man's handsome face paled even more. He pursed his lips slightly. "Imperial Consort has helped me settle down those people inside." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Qiu Yang." "Emperor." Feng Zhouqing swept a glance at the trembling Tang Cai behind him. His handsome face, which had lost its composure for a moment, returned to normal. 3 words flowed from his lips faintly: "Auspicious Harmony Palace." "Yes." When he saw Huai Yang coming out from inside, he was about to chase after him. Shen Yueji gave him a look, and Shuangxi immediately pulled him back. "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.